Josephine Karianjahi, welcome to GMF Talk. So you're the co-founder and co-director of Africa Podfest. For anyone who hasn't heard of it, can you tell us a bit about what it is?
Thanks, Sophie, and thank you, Deutsche Welle, for this occasion to talk about the biggest African podcast festival in Africa. That's where we started. Africa Podfest started as a gathering point for podcasters focused on the African continent, from the African continent, identifying with the African diaspora. And since then, it's grown into a podcast research hub where we look at podcasting across the continent. We do podcast production. And we, of course, have our flagship event, which is the Africa Podcast Day, which is on February 12th every year.
So what motivated you to set up Africa Podfest, and why do you think it's important?
I think one of the biggest gaps we have in the African media landscape, and in fact, the global media landscape, is that it's heavily skewed towards a very traditional setup of who gets seen and who gets heard. Podcasting has presented an opportunity, particularly for women and other minorities across the continent and beyond, to be heard, to craft their own messaging, to use traditional distribution networks, so community networks, social media platforms, etc., to give their message and their perspective in a way that they can be heard, their stories can be heard. And of course, this helps kind of fight the negative stereotypes about Africa that really persist across the media landscape, because you get so many more perspectives, and from a perspective where you can get it on your phone wherever you are across the world. That hasn't happened in a huge way across Africa until the last few years, even though podcasting is not new across the continent.
So podcasting can help address some of the long-standing underrepresentation of certain voices in the media. If we focus on that for a second, can you tell me a bit more about what types of perspectives and stories you'd like to see gain more widespread media coverage?
I'd like to see more stories covered by women. And I'll give an example. There's a new podcast that's really been making waves. It's called I Will Not Grow Old Here. People who listen to podcasts and who are following Global South stories may have heard of this Ambi-nominated One World Media Award-winning podcast. And the story behind it is told by a woman reporter. Her name is Marianne. She's under 25, and she tells a story of Alexandra, which is a township right near Johannesburg in South Africa, where not that many people live and work and report from. There are journalists, of course, from this part of the world, but she manages to tell a personal story that's rooted in a much more complex story, which is youth employment and underemployment in South Africa and really across Africa. So it's these kinds of stories that we're hoping that podcasts will emphasize, and also that will give young people across Africa an opportunity to be heard and to craft their own stories and their own messaging.
And briefly, if you can, are you seeing any particular trends emerging in African podcasting this year?
A lot of people are leaning into mobile first audio for their podcasting. And what this means is it's not just about picking up a mobile phone and a set of headphones. It's really understanding how to make bite-sized stories, how to tell people in the next community in their own language what they need to hear for timely information. And this is not just from a commerce perspective, this is from a society building perspective. And we're going to see much more mobile reporting, mobile storytelling grow across the continent, particularly in audio and podcasting. And that's really exciting.
Josephine Karianjahi, thank you so much.